Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe Simpson with TechWake TV, bringing you value in the slipstream of technology. That sounds really cool, but basically I just like finding old stuff that's still useful, that's cheap. So that's the deal. What I want to talk about today isn't actually all that cheap. It's the Sony FDR X3000, and it's a really kick-butt action camera, and it doesn't get enough props in my opinion. This camera came out a few years ago and it still competes with all the latest, greatest cameras and holds its own even today. And let me just show you what it looks like. Here's the side view. Now this camera does not have a flip out screen or an LCD screen or any type of screen where you can see pictures and photos. It just has a menu. On the back section of the camera, it does have a USB connector so you can charge and download your videos. It has a microphone input, which is actually very unusual for a camera like this, and has an HDMI port. Most of these ports I never use. On the other side of this camera is very simply the battery cover. It pops open, it contains the battery inside, and that's about it. So why would I make such a big deal about a camera like this? It doesn't really seem all that snazzy. Really, you have to punch through the menu like you do the old style GoPros, and it's not the easiest camera to use, but let me tell you, it's one of the best quality cams out there. And the one thing I do like about it is that it has a lot of convenient features. So I like to look at an action camera as something that I can just grab and go. So we're going to call this grab and go factor the overall umbrella rating, which is comprised of 3 different areas. And I just took 2 minutes to scratch this down because I wanted to kind of organize my thoughts about this camera. So really, when it comes to grabbing and going with a camera, you're going to want a camera that's durable, convenient to use, and of course has the quality that you need to get the job done. Durability. This thing is super tough. Now this comes with also a lens cover that I don't currently have on. But this plastic case and the way that it's built, I've dropped it numerous times. It's really, really durable. So as far as being tough build, Sony really knocked it out of the park here. Waterproof. This actually isn't waterproof, but let me tell you, if you guys remember like that old Sony gray and yellow phone that you used to have in your house that was wireless and they would call them weather resistant, Sony does this thing where they gasket all their doors and compartments. They actually rate this camera as weather resistant. I've had this out in a pretty heavy downpour with no issues. So as far as scuba diving, I wouldn't do it. But the way the thing sits right now with the rubberized buttons and the gaskets, I have no problem standing in the rain with this camera. And it costs $400, so I'm not somebody who would go out and just throw away money. Freeze proof. This thing can go down to some seriously cold temperatures. So if you're out in the wilderness and you're out in the snow, I've left this thing in my truck overnight before, and it really does great. In cold weather. It has no problems at all. Sometimes the menu gets a little laggy because of the LCD and the slowness of it, but everything works. Convenient to use. That would be the next factor I would look for in a camera that is just a grab and go camera. And the one-touch power on record is great. This camera, you just take it, push the button, and you see that it powered on and started recording, and it gives you the signals to tell you that it did it. I really like the one-touch record feature because when this thing is mounted on my hat, it really comes in handy to be able to just touch it and hear the beeps and know that it's recording. The other thing is that something so stupid that GoPro just won't do, and I'm really sick of it. I just get tired of buying accessories for these things. I've actually bought no accessories for this camera. This camera has a built-in quarter 20. Now this may not seem like a big deal, but this is such a big deal to me. When I put this on my hat, like I have a hat and I drill a hole through it and I put a quarter 20 bolt and I spin this thing down on my hat bill and basically, when I go fishing, my hat's here and this thing is right here looking where I look. It's incredible. And I just take this thing with me, take my hat. That's all I need. If it rains, if I fall down, no matter what happens, this thing is securely fitted to my hat and it's not going to be a problem at all. So as far as convenient to use, this thing's awesome. And it has a nice big button on top. So if you had to use your gloves or if you had winter gloves, you could just push the button and go. I just think it's so much easier to use than actually even a touch screen on the back of some of these cameras. They're neat and it's nice to be able to see your framing, but when you're doing wide angle action cam, do you really need to frame that well? Just point it in a direction, hit go, and hope for the best, and it usually turns out great. So of course you're going to want quality from a camera when you're doing these action cam videos. Now this is a 4K camera. You can see right here on the side it says 4K, And it actually does 4K, 30 frames a second, and it is very nice looking video. As far as the colors that come straight off of the camera, very sharp, very clear. They're very accurate. I really like this camera a lot. It does blow out the highlights a little bit, so I have to tame those down in post. But the 4K from this camera is outstanding. But that's not the most impressive setting for me. The one I love the most is 1080p 60 frames. That is just the most sharp, nicest looking 1080 out of an action cam I've ever seen. And at 60 frames a second, so you can get some slow motion with it. That's the way I use it the most. When you run this thing with the 4K, it gets a little bit less battery life. I'd say about 50 minutes on a normal battery. And these come with the Sony batteries. I've used the Wasabi backup batteries, and those work good too. But when you go to 1080p 60 frames, you get about an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes out of these batteries, and you get longer battery life, you get high frame rate, and who's kidding who? When you're using a sports cam, 4K really isn't the important thing. It's actually capturing the moment, and 1080p is usually good enough for YouTube. The other thing is it has 1080p 120 frames, so you could do some super slow-mo. Now you do take a little bit of a quality hit here. Now it is 1080 and it is 120 frames, but for some reason the compression gets a little funky and it looks a little soft. But if you had something kind of close, a fish was fighting and jumping out of the water, you could get that slow-mo and it looks really cool. I left the best feature about this camera for last. This thing is just amazing. The stabilization on this camera still holds its own even against the GoPro 7. This is optically stabilized. I don't know if you guys can read the top of this camera, but this camera has steady shot, optical stabilization. So what does that mean to you? This camera actually has a sensor inside which is stabilized physically as the camera moves, so it counters the movements of your hand to stabilize the footage, and it works incredibly well. If you're walking down a path facing it to yourself, or if you're facing it out, you don't get the like up and down walking motion. It's very, very smooth. It's almost freaky how good it is. And even the GoPro Hero 7 today, which uses an amazing digital stabilization, is only as good maybe. I don't even think it's as good. The Sony is just incredible. The only time I have a problem with the optical stabilization was this thing's mounted on my hat and I look left and I look right. It does take a second to kind of catch up. If you don't do a big fast motion, this thing is amazing stabilization. Nobody ever complains about jitteriness, motion, or any problems with my camera when I use it on my hat. That's really all I have to say about this camera. I'll go outside and walk around with it for a few seconds and give you some footage. Indoors, this thing will not knock your socks off, but I wanted to show you how I have it rigged up. I basically got it on this little handheld handle, and it's just bolted directly to it. And when I talk about convenience, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You can bolt it right to a handle and take off. So here I am walking around with this camera vlogging, and I've got my whole face in the frame. I don't need a flip out camera because I know I'm in frame and I know it's working well. So right now I'm outside. It's a real dreary day, overcast, so the colors aren't going to be vibrant. It's winter grossness and everything's dead. But this gives you an idea of what this thing looks like and how my voice sounds on this camera, because you can tell that this is actually a very good audio recording coming straight out of the camera. And I'm hand holding this with quite a bit of wiggle in my hands, and you're looking at 1080p 60 frames a second. So this is going to be representative of what I do most of the time when I go out and I go fishing and I put this thing on my hat. So now I've switched into 4K. I don't know if you can really tell a resolution difference. This video that I'm going to put on YouTube is in 4K, so it's going to give you the best possible resolution that I can give you. But I don't know if you're going to be able to tell much difference from the 1080p and the 4K, but I'll try to get some up-close shots of some things, at least so you can see how it resolves the image. Anyway, here's some close-up shots of some stuff to kind of give you an idea of the 4K resolution. Leaves are starting to pop out on these things, man. Spring is around the corner. So now I'm going to just walk towards my deck to show you guys how stable this thing is and see what you guys think of its stabilization. I'm actually doing full stride. I'm not going crazy trying to stabilize it, and I think it's doing a pretty good job. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to turn back over to the main camera and we'll finish up. Yeah, I don't know enough good things to say about this camera because I really do love it. And I think you can tell by my energy level on this thing that it's a really, really solid buy. Even at $400 today, I think it's a great buy. I know there's a lot of cheaper cameras out there, even ones that say they have 4K, but I have yet to see any that have the video quality and the total package like this thing. The convenience, the battery life, the one-touch record, the audio, the stabilization. This thing is really wonderful. So if you were just getting started, you could actually use this camera as your all-around vlogger. Give it a look, check it out. Hopefully it's a good one for you. And if you have any questions or if I missed any aspects of this camera, just let me know in the notes below and I'll respond. I try to respond to every single person who puts a comment on my page. So if there's anything you want to see or learn about, tell me and I'll do it. And I'll see you guys soon. Have a great weekend. Take care.